Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about the Russian crisis of 1998. So first of all, we're going to give you an economic overview. Russia's economy is predominantly static, with a high concentration of wealth in officials' hands, in particular the energy, the transportation, and the banking sector. Russia is one of the world's leading producers of oil and natural gas, and Russia is vulnerable to boom and bust cycles that follow swings in global commodity prices. The chief of state is the President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. The government type is the semi-presidential federation, and the population in 2018 is 145,734 millions. The principal commercial allies are China, Netherlands, and Germany. The GDP in 2018 was 1,629,198 million current as US dollars. In this slide, you can find some more information about the economic situation of Russia, for example, the exports, the top imports, and the trade balance, the exchange rate, etc.
Now let's talk about the timeline of events that led to the crisis. It all started with the Thai baht crisis in 1997. The weakening of this currency soon spread throughout the Asian continent, which frightened investors. In November 1997, the Russian currency was under a speculative attack. By mid-1998, to support the ruble and reduce fiat capital, the central bank increased the interest rate to 150%. By July 1998, monthly interest payments on Russia's debt rose to an amount 40% higher than the country's monthly tax collection, and that, along with all the situation, eroded investors' confidence. By August 17, 1998, the peak of the crisis was reached. Russia's government announces a package of drastic measures. It raises the limit at which the ruble can fluctuate against the dollar, allowing it to devaluate, and the government orders a 90-day moratorium on repayments of some foreign debt by banks and announces a restructuring of ruble-dominated debt. In August 25, 1998, the ruble falls sharply and trade in the currency has to be suspended as it loses some 40% of its value against the German mark. And finally, in August 26, 1997, Russians withdraw savings in maize. Many stores closed to mark up prices. Now, regarding the currency chart, in 1998, the Russian government announced a set of emergency measures in order to prevent a further escalation of the crisis. One of those was a significant devaluation of the ruble. To accomplish this, the bounds of the corridor in which the ruble fluctuated were widened, especially in August 1998. After that, in September 1998, the Russian central bank decided to remove the currency corridor and make the ruble a freely floating currency. The ruble soon starts to depreciate sharply, and in 3 weeks, the currency loses 2/3 of its value. We see how then the price of the dollar begins to grow, but in 2000, it begins to stabilize and better control is achieved. To begin with the analysis of our macroeconomic indicators, we will start by looking at the current account. Because of the Asian crisis, world prices for oil and other raw materials decreased largely. Russian foreign reserves are heavily dependent on exports of these products. In 1998, fuel accounted for 43% of Russian exports. The fall in oil prices has decreased Russian export revenues, causing the Russian current account to go from 3.9 billion surplus in 1997 to an estimated 4.5 billion deficit in 1998. The low price of commodities was negative at first, but later it was positive for Russia. First, the low price and the steep devaluation of the ruble increased the deficit because export earnings were not high. Then, after the highest point of the crisis was overcome, foreign buyers were attracted by the recovery in the price of oil and the low price of the ruble. Thus, the commodities made the current account return to positive behavior.
It's important to keep in mind that the financial account includes the direct investment, portfolio investment, and the reserve assets broken down by sector. In this case, besides the currency imbalance, there was a maturity imbalance because banks borrowed foreign currency on a short-term basis in order to be rolled over as long as that was possible and lend long-term. Also, we can see that as a consequence of the Asian crisis, there was a great reduction in foreign direct investment, losses on the GKO that were short-term zero-coupon government bonds, and there was a negative outflow of capital. In addition, in 1997, Russia increased the public debt with the central bank and the IMF, decreasing the reserve assets, which complement the financial account. The imbalance between these two accounts caused a deficit on this account. Therefore, Russia couldn't pay these debts and was declared in suspension of payments.
Okay, now I'm gonna talk about inflation. As the graph shows, the years before the crisis inflation has decreased because for this time the Russian government changed its practice of financing the deficit in the balance of payments through printing more money. In the way to avoid this inflation and finance the deficit, Russia gets debt with the World Bank and with the International Monetary Fund. In 1997, Russia implemented measures to modernize the economy. These measures include opening the market and increase the foreign investment, but the default of liabilities with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank produced that investor mistrust. In addition, to keep the limit of the floating bonds, the Russian government can control the exchange, and the speculation produced that investors was sell Russian rubles, devaluing the currency. And for counteract this effect, the central bank spent its foreign currency reserves, avoiding a big inflation. Even when the central bank spent $27 billion, the inflation reached 27% between the 97 and the 98. Now, in terms of interest rate, for this period of time of the crisis that started with the decrease of the commodities prices as petroleum and gas that represent of the majority of the Russian exports. After the Soviet Union broke, Russia started a process to open the market, because the communism model has a lot of problems, principally with a high public spending. So, in the way to finance this public spending was through the external debt. In order to avoid the inflation, the Russian bank established a limit of maximum and minimum volume per dollar. To keep this, Russia gets macroeconomic measures like highest interest rate and reduce the money offered. In the interest rate start to increase so fast. This action had the negative impact in the economy because it caused the outflow of the foreign capital and investment, as the graph shows.
So, how was the crisis solved? The government and the central bank froze operation with short-term government bonds that matured before December 31st of 1999. These bonds will be reconverted into new securities. In order to revive the financial stock market, the Russian government will introduce short-term securities which mature between 1 or 2 weeks. Russia started to change the model of the raw materials economy to develop new sectors and segments, for example, the assembly of foreign cars. Also, The flow of investment was encouraged, and many foreign companies began to open their subsidiaries in the country, and national companies went out to international markets. In addition, small business began to develop in large companies, different from the economy of raw materials. Also, taking advantage of the inflation of 300% and the processes of selling goods in foreign markets, Russian products were cheaper and can take a competitive advantage with other countries and being able to find new markets.
Now, in conclusion, one of the principal reasons about what the crisis was the change of the economical system from a communism controlled by the state to a free trade. The second is the decision of the central bank to freeze the short-term government bonds in order to reintroduce them was crucial to overcome the crisis because it helped to revive the financial stock market. The third conclusion is that the decrease of the price of goods from Russia contribute to the crisis, but also it helps Russia to be more competitive and reach a competitive advantage because their goods are more cheaper than other countries. And the fourth conclusion is that mismanagement of fiscal policy was a great problem of the Russian crisis. And this is all the presentation. Thanks.